Okay, am I on? Okay, so, sorry, I do apologize. I'll start from the top just again. So, my name is Joseph Jordan. I'll be bringing you today's lesson, and we'll be looking at tenses. More precisely, we'll be looking at tenses in a nutshell. An easier way to look at tenses. I'm sure many of you, whether you're elementary, pre-intermediate, intermediate, or upper intermediate, we struggle deciding what tense we should actually use in a sentence. So in today's lesson, we'll be looking at the variety of tenses that we have in the English language and why we use these tenses in English and what these tenses actually do. We'll be looking at the variety of structures that we have. But more importantly, hopefully, my aim is to somehow simplify this process for you. So when you're talking to a native speaker or to another speaker of the English language, you won't be struggling thinking about what tense you need to use in order to form a sentence so you can have meaningful conversation. For a lot of students, this is what a lot of my upper intermediate advanced students look like, and TOEFL students as well in the writing section. They often say, I don't know what tense to use. And again, today I hope to actually simplify that for you. Another thing is like this past perfect or present perfect or future perfect simple or future perfect continuous. If I use this in a sentence, it will look cool. It doesn't look cool. It only looks, it can look correct if it's used correct, but you can't just use past perfect because you think it looks cool, because you think it's going to get you more points, because you think it's a difficult tense to use. We don't really have that logic in language. Not just the English language, we don't have that logic in the Turkish language either. The tenses that we use in Turkish are determined by a number of things or a number of reasons, which we'll come to very shortly. And how can I remember all of this? It's so confusing. Well, it can be confusing. It can be incredibly confusing. But, practice makes perfect. The more practice you do, the better it is. And when I say practice, I don't mean, when you finish elementary, you move on to pre-intermediate and you forget everything you've learned in elementary. It's not important. You think it's too easy. But we need to remember that we're living in a country, Turkey, where English isn't the native language, or it's not the first language. So we don't really have the practice we would have if we were working, let's say, in the UK or in America or in other English-speaking countries where English is important in business, such as, Germany or Japan, where it's spoken as a second language. So practice really does make perfect, but how much do you need to practice? We'll see that a little bit later on today as well. So I'm going to move down here, and I'm going to give you maybe, I'm going to give you a minute, actually. I'm going to put a timer up here. Timer, and we'll come to that very shortly. Okay, forget the timer. I'll just look at my clock. So take a minute or two and think about how many tenses you can name in the English language. Of course, if you're an intermediate student, you'll be able to name far less than a student who is upper intermediate. So I'm going to give you maybe a minute to actually think about that. Maybe write your answers on a piece of paper or your notebooks. I hope that you have your notebooks with you. This is, after all, an online class. Classroom notebooks, they sort of go together. So I'm going to give you a minute to look through that and think about as many tenses as you can actually think of. And I'm going to go to YouTube and I'm going to see any comments that you put up. I'll give you a minute. What's the time? Time's 2:10. Understanding tenses, there we are. There's me online. We don't have any chats at the moment. That's cool. I'll keep that open. I'll look at it once in a while. I won't be able to continuously look at the chats because I have my notes up on the other computer to help me save some time and to make sure that this lesson is organized. And I'll turn the sound off there so we don't get any feedback. I'll go back to my notes. I'll come back. Hi. Hey, Osgush. How are you? Thank you, Mr. Shafati. Everything's okay, thank you very much. There's 16 people here. Hello, 16 people. We have Lale, I think I know her. Who else do we have? And that's all we have at the moment. I think it was good. Did you come to my class last Friday? I did a lesson on word formation. If you find today's lesson useful, you may find that useful too. And we'll be continuing word formation this coming Friday. I think last week we started to look at prefixes, and we followed with some roots or from the Greek and Latin language and how they affect the meaning of a word. And this Friday we'll be looking at some more roots, and we'll be looking at suffixes and how suffixes can help us. And then we'll be looking at some basic practice there, looking at some sentences with new vocabulary. So how we can actually use the information that we learn in order to understand that word in a sentence. Okay, so let's go back to the tenses. You know, if a lot of you will probably say something like, we have past, and of course down here we have present, and down here we have future. And when we think of tenses, that's how we think of them in Turkish. But that's not how we think of tenses in English. Actually, this part of a tense is a very, very small part. It's a minor part when it comes to deciding what type of tense we need to use. I'm sure a lot of you actually have, maybe, we have, whoops, there we go. We have present simple, of course, and I'll give you an example of a present simple sentence as well. Something like, past simple. Something like, I went to work yesterday. Here we can see the verb go is in the past simple form. Of course, go is also an irregular verb, and the past of go is went. Some of you may also have present continuous. I'll just put an S there. Past continuous, and an example of a past continuous sentence would be something like this. She was working at 3 yesterday. You may also have something like, I don't know. We also have present perfect simple, a favorite amongst students, and also a difficult one to use. Say past perfect simple, not present perfect simple, past perfect simple. So something like, she had already left before I arrived. And of course, with the past perfect simple, we have the subject, we have the auxiliary verb had, and we also have the past participle here. We can go down to the present form. We have present simple, and an example of that would be, I go to work every day. Why is that not? There we go. I go to work every day. Of course, here we're using the base form of the verb to show that an action happens, well, quite literally, every day. Then we have past continuous, shape present continuous, and an example of this would be, she's working at the moment. We'll come back to these a little bit later. Let's just put all of these up on the board. Then, of course, we have present perfect simple, and an example of this would be, she has already left. And then down here we have, in this form here, we have again a perfect tense, and we have present perfect continuous, and an example of that would be something like this. I've been living in Turkey for 15 years. Again, we have that auxiliary verb have, we have the past participle of the verb to be, we have the verb ing as well. Lots and lots of stuff to remember. For future, we have, of course, the future simple, and an example of this would be, I will go to work tomorrow. Now, a quick note on future tenses. We always see this modal verb will. We'll come back to this very shortly, in fact. We also have future continuous, and an example of a future continuous word would be, she will be working at 3 tomorrow. I'm going to quickly highlight this one, future continuous, and then we'll come down to, we have future perfect, simple, and an example of this would be, she will have already left. Again, with the other perfect tenses, we have this have or had, and we have this past participle here. I've left that sentence empty. It needs to be continued, but I simply didn't have any room. And then finally we have, again, we have a perfect tense. There we go. And an example of future perfect continuous would be, I will have been living in Turkey for, I don't know, 20 years this time next year. Oha. So I think if we quickly count up all of these, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I'm sure there's possibly one missing somewhere as well. We've got one missing up here. There we go. We forgot past perfect continuous. How did I forget that one? Looks amazing, doesn't it? Again, you know, even though these structures look complicated to use, really don't use past perfect continuous or past perfect simple or present perfect simple or present perfect continuous or future perfect simple or future perfect continuous because you think it looks good. You know, it needs to look or be used correctly. So I think we can see in Turkish that in English, we have about 12 or 11 tenses. Well, no, we have 12 tenses. And that's not really, we're going to do this actually, because that's not really a useful way at looking at tenses. Tenses are so much more, not complicated, a little bit easier to understand rather than say 12. So how can we reduce this number? How can we reduce this number to a number in which we can memorize and we can practice? Well, we're going to be looking at the Turkish word, tense. What does tense mean in Turkish? Oh, 6. Eran kuşlar, really? 6. Past perfect continuous. Yep, I forgot that one too. 4, Oksana, you got very close, actually. Not as close as Eran kuştu. But, you know, you'll be surprised. We can even get that number of tenses a little bit less. You know, even 4 or 6, that's a lot of information to remember. If we go back to the basics of what a tense is and what a tense explains, then we're going to have a limited number of options. So, as I said in Turkish, I often think the difficulty or the confusion comes from the translation of the word tense. When we think of the word tense, we think of zaman. Well, zaman means time. And here we only have 3 basic times. If we look at each individual time, past, present, and future, we still have an incredible amount of information that we need to memorize. We still have, at the end of the day, 12 different tenses. If we want to talk about the past, we still need to decide if that action is going to be simple or continuous. We need to decide if that action is going to be perfect simple or perfect continuous. Again, if we decide that we need to talk about the present, we still have an option of 4 possible choices: simple, continuous, perfect simple, and perfect continuous. It's still absolutely confusing. If we go down here to the bottom, I'm going to try and speak a little bit slow. I'm a little bit nervous, to tell you the truth. I'm going to have some water because my mouth is dry. I'll do this so you don't hear me. And even if we want to talk about the future, we have a choice of 4 possible tenses. Again, we have future simple, future continuous, future perfect simple, future perfect continuous. I'm a native speaker. Şimdiden kafam şişti, you know, thinking about this information. It's absolutely confusing. So, you know, I'm going to actually say no. Where's that there? Tense doesn't mean zaman. It actually means so much more than that. I'm going to quickly go here to my notes. So we're going to begin, and I'm going to bring this up to the top, and I'll bring these down to the bottom because I'm going to use those later. Just want to save a little bit of time, so I'm not writing continuously. So what are tenses and what are they used for? Well, before we, oops. Actually, I'll continue writing before we answer this question. We need to understand what the verb does. The verb and the tense, they are intrinsically related with each other. We can't have one without the other, as it were. So we need to think about verbs and what verbs do. And verbs basically do one of 2 things. They describe an action. They describe an action, the way an action happens. And that's basically where we're going to start today. We're going to be starting by looking at these actions and how these actions can help us decide what tense we need to use. They also describe states. Actions are something we can observe, we can see. If I do this, it's an action, it's something you can see. If I nod my head, again, it's an action you can see. But when we look at states, states are often feelings or ideas or concepts, things that we can't really see with the naked eye. Love, for example. Okay, we can show people that we love them by doing things, by our actions, but as a feeling, it's an emotion, it's something that's inside of us, it's something that we can't see. Again, like, we can show people that we like something by an action, but the verb itself, like, is not an action, it's a state. It comes from inside. You either like something or you don't, or you like something or you dislike something. So that's where we need to begin. What does that verb do? Is that verb describing an action, or is that verb describing a state? And I'm going to drop it in here somewhere. We'll go back here. And we're going to put that there. So, when we talk about verbs which are actions, they're also known as dynamic verbs. It's not important that you remember them as being dynamic verbs. You can remember them as action verbs. But dynamic is a useful term that will come in handy a little bit later. So let's have a look at some examples of these. We have the verb ride. We also have the verb sit down. For example, to ride a bike, to sit down on a chair. We also have the verb to stand up. If we put it in a sentence report last night, they've been fighting for a long time. If you're not careful, you will have a fight with him. We also have the verb read. Now, I know many of you already know these verbs, but how often do you use these verbs on a daily basis? How often do you use them so that when you're speaking to a native speaker, you can remember that verb immediately? This is what I mean by practice. It's not important that you know the meaning of the verb. You need to practice the meaning of the verb. Practice it continuously so when you are talking to a native speaker, you remember that verb immediately. You don't just need to remember the verb. You can practice the verb in a variety of sentences. Okay, I need to quickly close the window. I'll be back very shortly. Back. Okay, hopefully everybody will be able to hear me now. When we look at practicing verbs, because we don't use them on a daily basis, it's important that we try to practice them as much as possible. It's not enough that we know the meaning of the word read, ne demek biliyorum, işte okumak. Practice that in a sentence. Practice it in a past sentence, a present sentence, or a future sentence. Such as, I read a book. I read books every day, and I will read a book later. We have other verbs, of course, like run. He ran. He was running. We have the verb dance. She likes to dance would be an infinitive, but we had a dance yesterday. There we have a past simple sentence. It looks like it's past perfect because we're using that verb had. We also have win, and I'm going to actually do this for the rest of them. Bump, and we'll go through them one by one. So we've got this verb lose, to lose a game of chess. Yesterday, I lost a game of chess. If you don't practice hard, you will lose at the game of chess with your friend. We have a verb like cry. When I got home yesterday, she was crying. He has been crying all day. You will cry if your father gets angry at you. Future simple. We have the verb sing. They were singing. They have been singing all day. When I got home, they had been singing all day, past perfect continuous. I'm sure many of you were impressed with that. We have watch. I've been watching TV all day. We've been watching TV all day. We will watch TV when we get home. Sleep. She slept until 10. When you came round the house, I was sleeping, past continuous. I will probably be sleeping at 3 o'clock this afternoon, future continuous. I will have, sorry, that would be stupid. She will have been sleeping for 15 hours in an hour's time, future perfect continuous. Wow. Then we have sleep. Then we have the verbs like close. She closed the door. He has just closed the door. And even open. I have opened the door. She has closed the door. She had just closed the door when I got home, past perfect. And of course, some of these verbs can't be used in a continuous. And then we have on this side, we have, where's that little box? There we go. We have states, verbs that we don't really see. I'm going to quickly go down. Verbs that we don't really see with the eye. So we've already discussed the verbs love and liked. Hate and want also, as you can see, they're state verbs too. I hate watching TV. She wants to go. We need some new trainers. Prefer. I prefer to read a book to watching TV. I own a bookshelf, but I don't own much else. I don't own a television, for example. Present simple. I doubt that what she is telling us is true. Again, we have present simple. She deserved what she got. We have past simple. We have I lack money, or I had a lack of money in the past simple, or I lacked money if we want to focus just on that verb. We have owe. My friend owes me 50 lira. We have know. I know a lot about biology. Present simple. In the past, I knew a lot about... What did I know a lot about in the past? I knew a lot about dinosaurs in the past, but I don't know much anymore. And then we've got the other ones as well. Realize, understand, believe, remember, involve, and belong, and depend. So let's move down here. So, what do tenses do? What's their actual function? I'm going to quickly take these away and reduce the number to 18. What do tenses do? Well, tenses tell us one of two things. They give us some important information, and we'll just make it like that. To begin with, they tell us how the action or state is taking place. They give us information about that action or about that state. They tell us how that action or state is taking place in time, how it's taking place in the past, how it's taking place in the present, and also how it's taking place in the future. If we go back to the top here, whoops, gone up too far. If we go back here, actually, if we look, this tense here, past simple, actually has two parts. We've got past, we have simple. This one here is three parts. We have past, perfect, simple. But really, in order to understand English tenses better, you need to approach it like you would Arabic. In English, we read from left to right. To understand a tense or to understand what tense you need to use, do it the opposite. Start from right, like in Arabic, and continue to left. So here, actually, when we look at tenses, it's this section here. Can I color that? We will color it like that. It's basically telling us how the action or state happens. And if you look here, can you actually notice how many different types of action do we have? I'll give you a second to think about that. Did you guess? We only really have two actions. We have this action here, simple, and we'll change that to a different color. We'll take that off, and we'll change it to, I don't know, red. We have simple, and we also have continuous. They're the only two possible ways we can describe an action or a state. We don't have 12 different ways. We can describe that action in time in two ways, simple and continuous. So let's put that down here. They tell us if it's simple or continuous. Actually, if I quickly just do this, and I go up here, so we have simple and we have continuous. They're the only two actions that we have. Of course, every other tense at the top is made from these two basic actions. This is where we need to begin. Before we decide if we need past simple, past continuous, past perfect continuous, any of that nonsense, before we decide that, we need to think about the action that we are explaining and how that action happens in time. Is that action a simple action or is it a continuous action? Secondly, they tell us when the action is happening, when the action or state is happening. So that's what tenses do. They tell us when. Actually, if we go back up here, this part here is actually telling us when that action happens. And we're going to quickly go down here again. So we know that this simple action, the way the action happens, is happening in the past. Here, we know that this simple action, which is the same action, we'll see an example very shortly, we know that this action is happening in the present, because we have present simple. Here, again, we know that the action is simple. And here we see that the action is simple, but it's a simple action in the future. Past simple, present simple, and future simple, actually, it would be easier to think of them as being the same tense. Not technically, but in terms of action or state. The same reasons we use present simple are the same reasons why we use past simple. The reasons why we use past simple are the same reasons why we're using future simple. We have that simple action in the future, we have that single action in the present, and we have that action also in the past too. So again, just to reiterate, this here is where we begin when it comes to choosing a tense. Step 2 is over here, which tells us when that action happens. So I'm going to quickly go down here. Okay, wow, I've done a lot. Tells us when the action happens. And the way we do this by verb, verb. I'll get my English and Turkish. My English and Turkish is getting mixed up. We call verb inflection. Yeah, I think verb inflection, I'm not sure, but I think verb inflection in Turkish is something like salıyorum şimdi, verb çekimi. Something like that. Forgive me for my terrible Turkish. It should be better. I've been here for nearly 20 years. Verb inflection, and what that basically means is we change the verb in order to show time. If we look at a past simple example, he walked to the shops. There we have used the suffix ed to actually show that this is a past action. Of course, in the present simple, he walks to the shop every day. There we've used the base form of the verb, which shows us that this is a present action. And again, in the future, he will walk to work every day. Again, this action, we know this is a simple action, it's future simple. But that verb form, will walk, tells us that this action is actually a future action. So we change the form of the verb in order to show time. It's a very, very small part of forming a tense or forming an English. Again, we need to start from the action. Is the action single or is the action continuous? Once we've decided that, we move on to the next start and think, okay, it's a simple tense. I want it to use it in the past, so I need past simple. Okay, it's a simple action. I want to use it in the future, so I know now I need to use future simple. Again, it's a simple action, but I need to use this in the present. So we know that we need to use present simple. It really is that easy. What do tenses do? Okay, so I prepared that earlier, and for some reason I've kept it. So I don't know. I always find, learning Turkish, having a knowledge of my own language helped me understand the Turkish language. And I know many teachers, we recommend that students use English dictionaries, or when they're speaking English, they should only think in English too. I don't actually agree with that. Lots of linguists actually don't agree with that either. In fact, studies have been showing, like where vocabulary is concerned, it's easier to learn and to memorize a word if we learn it in our mother tongue first. So translation is sometimes a good thing. But I'm not giving you an example here for translation. I'm giving you an example to help us understand the parts. And we're going to start with something like, I don't know, we'll start with something very basic. Gidiyorum. And let me quickly get rid of this as well. That's terrible. So we're going to go with gidiyorum. Or we'll keep it a little bit. We'll start with gidiyorum. And then we'll go with gidiyorum. See what I mean about my Turkish? It's terrible. And then we have that future one. Gidiyor. Gidiyor. Olacağım. Thank God for a Turkish keyboard. So how does what we've just looked at apply to Turkish? Well, Turkish is like English. We inflect those verbs in order to show time. Not all languages are like that. Most European languages are like that, certainly. Turkish is also like that. A lot of the Indo-European languages are also like that, as well as the Ultraic languages. Whoops, I think I spelled that wrong. That's a big I. We'll put a small I in there. Of course, it's not true for all languages. Creole, another language, and Chinese, Malaysian, Indonesian, some Native American languages, they do not change their verb form to show time. So in Chinese, you would say, I go yesterday, in a Chinese accent. That's so racist. I go yesterday, I go today, and I go tomorrow. I wish it would be nice if every language was so easily. Here in Chinese, they're only using a time phrase, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And that's pretty much how they show tenses. But of course, in English and in Turkish, we have to use suffixes. We need to add something to show that this action happened in the past, or this action happened in the present, or this action happened in the future. So I'm going to highlight some parts here. Can you see that? Iur. We have that suffix. It's exactly the same in all of these variations or tenses of the verb gitmek, iur. And that verb, that iur suffix there, and I'll quickly put a little hyphen there. That iur, what does it show us? What does it tell us about that action? Well, it shows that we have duration. And I'm going to try it my very bad Turkish again. Süreç. It shows us that that action is existing in time. Gidiyordum. At that time, I was going to France, for example. We stretch that action out. It has duration, or süreç in Turkish. In the present form, it's gidiyorum, to show that the action is happening now. And those parts, actually, if we look, if we just look here, we'll make that blue. I'm a big fan of blue. Do that. I'm going to leave that olmak out a little bit because it's not necessary. Well, actually, quick mistake here. that would be actually better. I will make that black again. I am sorry, I'm a little bit OCD. And in the future, we're showing that that action here, well, actually, no, that the action here, of course, is happening in the future. And like in Turkish, that cek cak, in English, we need that too. So what about these blue bits? Well, these blue bits here, the suffixes. The suffix is dum, comma, comma, and comma. What do they show us, actually? They show us when the action happens. The action itself is described by this suffix here, ior. But then we have these suffixes that show us when, and I'm going to include this together, actually, because these two are partly together. I think that's my mistake there. It tells us when the action happens. Dum. It's a suffix to show that this action happened in the past. In the future. We could argue that all of these are in fact the same tense in terms of action. The action is the same. Of course, as I said earlier, where do we begin when we choose a tense? We start with the verb. We decide what type of verb is it. Is that verb is it a dynamic verb? Does that verb explain an action? Or does that verb actually describe a state? Once we've decided that, we've halved our work. So in English, gidiyordum. I was going to work. Be careful, it looks like going to do something. Here, work is actually a noun form, it's not the verb form. So this isn't Amizar going to work. And of course, in the future, I will be going to work at 3. We need to complete that. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. But if we look at the structure here, that part here, the ior, this section here, that duration in English, we show duration, that süreç. We show that with the suffix ing. Of course, we need to have these to be ing as well. We've got was, which is the past of be. We have am, which is the present of be. But we also have the base form of be itself. That's telling us how long that, it's telling us about the duration or the nature of the action. We know when we say I was going, or I am going, or I will be going, we're talking about duration. The same as Turkish. Actually, when I first started learning Turkish, past continuous and present continuous, I directly translated it. Of course, we have some differences. It does get a little bit complicated, but I don't know. If you're stuck, which tense do I need to use in English? If in Turkish you're saying kitabı okuyorum, then you can be sure that you need to use the present continuous tense. They're pretty much the same. There's one difference. We'll talk about that difference a little bit later. If you're going, o saatte okula gidiyordum, there we have, as we see down here, we have an example of past continuous. And you could really translate that directly from past continuous in English to that, I don't know what past continuous is in Turkish, to that gidiyordum. And 9 times out of 10, maybe 8 times out of 10, you're going to be correct. Don't sweat it. So let me go down here. I think, is it actually a break time? We'll take a break at the new attendees. If there's new students who have just attended it, it may look a little bit overwhelming. And it is overwhelming. It really is overwhelming. But we're looking at a basic way in which we can simplify our uses of tenses. So after the break, I'll have a quick recap on that information. Or I might continue a little bit more, and then we'll have a general recap. And then we'll start looking at the particular aspects of tenses and how we can actually use them. Okay, so enjoy your break time. I hope I'm going to do this correctly.